They didn't erase Mary Magdalene because she was irrelevant. They erased her because she was dangerous, not with swords or kingdoms, but with knowledge, with presence, with the ancient fire of the sacred feminine burning intact within her. 4. Centuries the true symbolism of the dragon was buried under fear and fables. But long before it was transformed into a monster, the dragon was sacred, a symbol of awakened feminine energy, coiled like a serpent at the base of your spine, waiting to rise. What was disguised as protection was actually control. And, now as the veil lifts, an uncomfortable truth emerges. What if everything you were taught to fear was exactly what could set you free? This isn't just another spiritual theory, it's a forgotten map to your own awakening. Few people know that the true story of Mary Magdalene was covered up by centuries of misinterpretations and intentional manipulations. It's no wonder that many end up confused when they encounter ancient texts. The journey to understand who she really was takes us down a path of mysticism and surprising revelations. In the Nag Hammadi manuscripts discovered in 1945, the image that emerges isn't that of a repentant sinner, but of a spiritual master deeply connected to gnosis, the direct and experiential knowledge of the divine. This completely changes what we thought about her, doesn't it? In the Gospel of Mary, she appears as someone who not only followed Jesus, but understood his messages at a level that the other disciples couldn't reach. And that's not all. Just imagine, while the other disciples were confused and fearful after the crucifixion, it was Mary Magdalene who brought comfort and clarity. She didn't ask permission to speak or explain the visions she had. She simply spoke with the authority of someone who knows the truth through personal experience. It's like when you know something so deeply that you don't need to consult books or ask for opinions, you know? This is the true meaning of Gnosticism, knowing through direct experience, not through blind faith or memorization of doctrines. Mary Magdalene embodied this direct connection to spirituality, something that challenged the power structures that were beginning to form. To experience this same connection, try meditating on an important question in your life. But instead of seeking external answers, observe the intuitions that arise from the inner silence. What few understand is that the relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene represented a balance of divine masculine and feminine, a spiritual partnership of equals that threatened the hierarchical model that would come to dominate institutionalized Christianity. When you stop to think about it, this was revolutionary for the time. This partnership symbolized the path to awakening consciousness, the integration of masculine and feminine principles within each person. In Gnostic texts, Mary is not portrayed as inferior or subordinate, but as a bearer of esoteric teachings that complemented those of Jesus. She represents intuitive wisdom, knowledge that comes from the heart, and direct experience, not just from the intellect. Why not start observing in your own life when you use more logic, masculine principle, and when you trust more in intuition, feminine principle? This simple exercise in self-knowledge can reveal a lot about your own internal balance. Behind this historical suppression, there exists a recurring pattern in the history of spirituality. Knowledge that liberates is often hidden or distorted. After all, free people are harder to control, aren't they? By reinterpreting who Mary Magdalene was, we challenge not just a historical narrative, but an entire belief system that has kept the feminine principle subjugated. The esoteric teachings she represented weren't about external worship, but about discovering inner divinity, something that resonates deeply with the oldest mystical traditions and also with the modern quest for spiritual awakening. When you encounter internal resistance to considering Mary Magdalene as a spiritual leader, ask yourself, where does this resistance come from? From your own experiences and intuitions, or from narratives you've absorbed throughout your life? This questioning itself is already an act of illumination, a small step on the path of personal gnosis. This reinterpretation isn't just an academic or historical exercise, it has profound implications for how we understand our own spiritual journey today. Mary Magdalene's story invites us to question, what else has been distorted or hidden in the spiritual traditions we've inherited? Shall we reflect on this together? Are we seeking our spirituality through intermediaries or looking for a direct and personal? Have you ever wondered why symbols like the serpent and the dragon cause so much discomfort in our culture? Well, the story isn't exactly what we've been told. In ancient traditions around the world, these symbols represented something completely different from what we associate them with today. Here's something interesting. In pre-Christian cultures, the serpent was seen as a bearer of wisdom, a guardian of the portals between worlds, and a symbol of regeneration and healing. It wasn't the villain of the story, but a guide on the path to spiritual awakening. In the mystery schools of ancient Egypt, for example, the Uraeus serpent on the foreheads of pharaohs symbolized enlightenment and the awakening of the third eye, the center of spiritual perception. In occult and esoteric traditions, this symbolism remained preserved, away from the eyes of those who feared its transformative power. The demonization of the serpent and the dragon didn't happen by chance. It was a deliberate maneuver to keep people away from knowledge that promoted spiritual autonomy. When we understand this, a lot of things start making sense. In reality, the serpent represents Kundalini energy, which, according to Eastern traditions, remains dormant at the base of the spine, waiting to be awakened. This awakening of consciousness isn't something abstract. It's a tangible experience of expanded perception and connection with higher dimensions of existence. The dragon, in turn, symbolizes this same energy when fully awakened and integrated into one's being. To experience a glimpse of this energy, try visualizing a golden light rising up your spine while breathing deeply. Many people report sensations of warmth, tingling, or expansion, small signs of the energetic potential we all carry. In practically all Gnostic and mystical traditions around the world, we find references to this serpentine energy. It's not mere coincidence, is it? The Mayans had Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent that brought knowledge to humanity. In India, yogis speak of Kundalini as the path to transcendence. In Western alchemy, the caduceus, the staff with two intertwined serpents, represents the balance of opposing forces and spiritual ascension. Jesus himself advised his disciples to be wise as serpents, a reference that gains new meaning when understood through this esoteric lens. What all these traditions point to is that this energy, when awakened through spiritual practices such as meditation, conscious breathing, and contemplation, catalyzes a process of inner transformation that leads to gnosis, direct knowledge of divine reality. The transformation symbolized by the serpent shedding its skin teaches us something profoundly valuable about the spiritual path. True mysticism requires that we abandon old layers of conditioning to reveal our luminous essence. When you think about it, this is revolutionary. When a serpent sheds its skin, there's nothing violent or traumatic about it. It's a natural process of renewal and growth. Similarly, true spiritual awakening doesn't come through conflict or denial, but through the natural maturation of consciousness. Observe in your life the skins you've already shed, limiting beliefs, outdated identities, behavioral patterns that no longer serve you. Each of these transformations was a small awakening, preparing the ground for a deeper understanding of reality. Gnosticism teaches that this process of continuous renewal is the path to spiritual freedom. This understanding of the symbolism of the serpent and dragon reconnects us with much older spiritual traditions that preceded organized religions, traditions that honored the wisdom of earth and the intuitive intelligence of the body. Just think about what this means. Instead of a spirituality that denies the body and nature, these symbols invite us to integrate all aspects of being: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. The energy represented by the serpent isn't something to be feared or repressed, but a sacred life force to be honored and consciously awakened. Try spending a few minutes each day in direct contact with the earth, bare feet on grass, or hands cultivating plants. This simple gesture reconnects you with the natural energy, currents that the ancients understood so well. The illumination we seek isn't separate from everyday life. It emerges when we open ourselves to this primordial wisdom that flows through all creation. And precisely because it represents such a powerful connection to the life force, this Symbolism is intrinsically linked to the feminine principle that has been systematically suppressed throughout history. The history of the suppression of the sacred feminine is, in fact, the history of a collective imbalance that has shaped our civilization for millennia. When we begin to investigate, it's impressive to realize how systematic and comprehensive this suppression has been. Before patriarchal religions dominated the spiritual landscape, there existed cultures that venerated the feminine principle as a direct manifestation of divine intelligence. In ancient matrifocal societies, intuition was valued as much as intellect. The body was considered sacred rather than sinful, and connection with nature was seen as a direct path to the awakening of consciousness. Gnosticism preserved fragments of this wisdom, teaching that true spiritual knowledge doesn't come only from texts or external authorities, but emerges from direct experience, a way of knowing traditionally associated with the feminine. This gnosis, or inner knowledge, represents a threat to systems that depend on intermediaries and hierarchies to maintain their power. Why was this knowledge so threatening that it needed to be systematically erased? It's simple. Genuine spiritual awakening produces people who cannot be easily controlled. When the sacred feminine is integrated into spirituality, individuals develop a direct connection with the source of wisdom, their own intuition and experience. They don't need permission to access the divine, as they recognize that this presence dwells within them. Authentic mysticism, with its practices of contemplation, meditation, and self-knowledge, offers tools for this independent awakening. 2. Experience this intuitive power. Try asking yourself an important question before sleeping, requesting guidance. Upon waking, immediately write down any insights, dreams, or sensations. Often, the wisdom we seek is already available when we silence the analytical mind and make space for the intuitive voice, a practice that resonates with the ancient feminine mysteries. Patriarchal religious systems not only marginalized female figures like Mary Magdalene, but also demonized qualities associated with the feminine: receptivity, intuition, connection with natural cycles, embodied wisdom. When we stop to reflect, we realize that even our spiritual language has been affected. Terms like submission, obedience, and humility were exalted, while empowerment, self-confidence, and inner knowledge became suspect. Spirituality became something to be sought outside rather than awakened within, a complete inversion of the original message brought by teachers like Jesus, who taught about the kingdom of heaven within. Gnosticism preserved this truth, teaching that illumination isn't a distant reward, but our essential nature waiting to be recognized. To reconnect with this suppressed wisdom, start observing when you distrust your intuition in favor of external authorities. This simple act of awareness is a step toward restoring the internal balance between the analytical masculine and the intuitive feminine. What many don't realize is that this suppression created not just a spiritual imbalance, but also psychological, social, and ecological imbalances. After all, when half of the spiritual equation is denied, the entire system becomes unstable. The consequences are visible in our relationship with the planet, which we treat as a resource, not as a living being, with our bodies, which we see as machines, not as sacred temples, and with our emotions, which we try to control instead of honoring as messengers. The path of the occult, when genuinely understood, has always sought to restore this balance, not elevating the feminine above the masculine, but recognizing that both are complementary aspects of the same divine energy. Try noticing in your life where there is excessive rigidity, imbalanced masculine, or lack of structure, imbalanced feminine. True energy, the kind that leads to awakening, arises when these principles dance in harmony within us. The good news is that the wisdom of the sacred feminine never completely disappeared. It just retreated into the shadows, waiting for the right moment to resurface. It's like that saying, you can bury the truth, but it always germinates. In esoteric traditions, in circles of wise women, in mystical practices passed down from generation to generation, this flame continued to burn. What we witness today, 'is a resurgence of this ancient knowledge, not as a rejection of the masculine, but as a restoration of the balance necessary for our spiritual evolution. Each time we honor our intuition, each time we recognize the wisdom of the body, each time we allow ourselves to feel deeply instead of just analyzing coldly, we are helping to restore the sacred feminine in our culture. This awakening isn't just personal but collective, a call to re-examine the foundational stories that have shaped our spiritual understanding. And it's precisely here that biblical narratives, when viewed through a broader lens, reveal layers of meaning that have been deliberately obscured. The stories that have shaped our spiritual culture are much deeper and multidimensional than we've been led to believe. When we begin to investigate the hidden layers of biblical narratives, an entirely new world opens up. Take, for example, the story of Eve in the Garden of Eden. For centuries, this narrative has been interpreted as the origin of sin, the fall of humanity, the reason for our separation from the divine. But what if we turn this story upside down? From the Gnostic perspective, Eve isn't the villain. She's the heroine who dares to seek knowledge beyond imposed limits. The serpent, far from being the deceiver, represents the impulse toward illumination and the awakening of consciousness. In choosing the fruit from the tree of knowledge, Eve isn't giving in to temptation, but responding to the inner call to evolve spiritually, an act of courage, not weakness. This reinterpretation isn't a modern distortion. It's rooted in ancient esoteric traditions that understood the symbolism behind religious narratives. This completely transforms our understanding, doesn't it? In Gnostic texts, we find fascinating parallels between Eve and Sophia, wisdom, the divine emanation who falls into the material world not through error, but through compassion and a desire to bring light to darkness. Early Christian mysticism, before it was suppressed, understood that these stories weren't literal but allegorical, maps of the human soul's journey in search of self-knowledge. Jesus frequently spoke in parables precisely because these symbolic narratives have the power to communicate profound spiritual truths that transcend the limitations of direct language. To experience this deeper level of understanding, try rereading a familiar biblical story, but ask yourself, if each character represented a part of me, what would this story be teaching me about my own spiritual journey? The figure of Sophia in Gnostic texts offers a powerful key to reinterpreting not just the creation myth, but our entire understanding of the relationship between spirit and matter. This is truly revolutionary when we reflect deeply. Sophia, the divine wisdom in feminine form, doesn't reject the material world. She dives into it out of love, bringing the divine spark into the density of form. Her journey isn't a shameful fall, but an act of cosmic compassion. This perspective radically transforms our relationship with the body and earth, not as traps to be transcended, but as sacred fields for spiritual awakening. Gnosticism teaches that the real problem isn't the material world itself, but the forgetting of our divine nature as we navigate through it. To connect with this wisdom in your everyday life, try seeing challenges not as punishments, but as opportunities for awakening, moments when the soul is invited to remember its origin and purpose. Another fascinating example is the figure of Mary, Mother of Jesus, traditionally presented as a model of submission and purity. But what do the more hidden aspects of tradition reveal to us? In truth, Mary represents much more than we've been told. In deeper layers of Christian mysticism, she embodies the principle of the Divine Mother, present in virtually all spiritual traditions. Her yes to the angel Gabriel isn't mere passive obedience, but a powerful act of conscious co-creation with the divine. She becomes the sacred vessel that brings spiritual light into the material world. This reinterpretation resonates with the esoteric tradition of spiritual alchemy, where matter, represented by the feminine, is impregnated by spirit, masculine, to generate awakened consciousness. Reflect on moments in your life when you said yes to an inner calling, even without fully understanding its magnitude. These are moments of alignment with the Marian principle, when we become conscious channels for a greater energy to manifest through us. These reinterpretations aren't mere intellectual exercises. They have the power to heal deep spiritual wounds and restore our connection with dimensions of consciousness that have been denied for centuries. After all, how much energy do we spend fighting against aspects of ourselves that we've been taught to consider sinful or inferior? The awakening of consciousness begins when we recognize that biblical narratives aren't stories about distant others, but maps of our own inner landscape. Eve, Sophia, Mary, all are aspects of the human psyche in search of integration and illumination. Gnosticism has always understood that scriptures speak about states of consciousness, not just historical events. Try keeping a journal where you rewrite a traditional spiritual narrative from an empowered and integrative perspective. This exercise isn't about denying tradition, but about recovering its deeper dimensions that have been obscured. And as we rediscover these ancient truths, we begin to realize that we're on the threshold of a prophesied time, the return of the sacred feminine principle to collective consciousness. Something extraordinary is happening in our time, a movement that transcends passing fads and points to a profound transformation in collective consciousness. The sacred feminine, after centuries of exile in the shadows of our culture, is emerging again. It's as if an ancestral knowledge were awakening simultaneously in thousands of people around the world. This isn't a superficial or merely political phenomenon. It's a profound energetic realignment, a course correction in humanity's spiritual evolution. People from all traditions are rediscovering wisdom practices that honor intuition, the body, natural cycles, and direct experience of the divine. Gnosticism has always understood that true enlightenment isn't about escaping the world, but awakening to the deeper reality that permeates it. Now this understanding resurfaces in new forms, inviting all of us to participate in this awakening of consciousness that reintegrates what was fragmented. This return doesn't represent a rejection of the masculine, but a healing of the artificial. Separation that divided complementary aspects of human experience. Think about this carefully. When the masculine and feminine are at war within and outside us, everyone loses. What we witness today is the beginning of a sacred reconciliation, not to return to an idealized past, but to create a more integrated and conscious future. The spirituality of the sacred feminine isn't exclusive to women. It's an energy available to all human beings, regardless of gender. Men who reconnect with their sensitivity, intuition, and capacity to nurture are equally participating in this awakening. To experience this integration in your own life, try this simple exercise. Identify a quality that you consider of the other gender and deliberately cultivate it in yourself for a week. Observe how this practice dissolves internal barriers and expands your experience of what it means to be fully human, and therefore fully spiritual. In the oldest mystical traditions, the path to enlightenment has always involved balancing internal polarities. This is the essence of authentic occult, not manipulation of external energies, but harmonization of the forces that dwell within us. When Jesus spoke about the kingdom of heaven is within you, he was pointing to this same fundamental truth that all Gnostic traditions understand. The divine isn't separate from us, but is our own essential nature when awakened. The sacred feminine brings back this embodied understanding of spirituality, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived experience in every cell. In the women's circles that are re-emerging, in meditative practices that honor the wisdom of the body, in movements that reconnect spirituality and ecology, we see manifestations of this collective awakening. How can you participate? Start by paying attention to the synchronicities in your life, those coincidental moments that seem guided by a greater intelligence. Write them down. Honor them as signs that you're opening yourself to perceiving the broader patterns of energy flowing through your life. What makes this historical moment so significant is that we aren't just recovering ancient practices. We're creating a new and necessary synthesis for our contemporary challenges. The integration of the sacred feminine with technology, science, and modern social structures offers unprecedented possibilities for human evolution. Imagine educational systems that value both intuition and intellect, leadership models that balance strength with compassion, medical approaches that treat the human being as an integrated whole. These aren't distant utopias. They're emerging, possibilities that arise when the feminine principle is honored alongside the masculine. Genuine spiritual awakening always manifests in concrete actions that benefit everyone. To bring this energy into your daily life, ask yourself, how can I bring more balance to my relationships, my work, my community? Small changes made with conscious intention create waves of transformation that extend far beyond ourselves. This return of the sacred feminine isn't guaranteed or automatic. It depends on our conscious participation and commitment. There are powerful resistances, both external and internal, to this integration. Power structures based on separation and domination don't dissolve easily, and patterns of conditioning entrenched in our own psyche can subtly sabotage our evolution. That's why Gnostic knowledge has always emphasized the importance of honest self-knowledge and consistent inner work. We're being invited not just to change our beliefs, but to transform our way of being in the world, to embody the principles of the sacred feminine in our daily actions, relationships, and choices. True mysticism was never about escaping reality, but about transforming it through our awakened presence. The energy returning now reminds us that enlightenment isn't something we conquer, but something we manifest moment by moment through choices, aligned with the wisdom of the heart. The awakening of consciousness happens not when we transcend our humanity, but when we fully embrace it, integrating all its dimensions. And in this embrace, we discover that what we were seeking was always present, waiting only to be recognized, honored, and lived. What will you do with this knowledge now? The story of Mary Magdalene and the dragon symbolism aren't just relics of the past. They're keys to your own spiritual awakening in the present. Where do you notice that you've abandoned your intuition in favor of external authorities? When was the last time you felt that serpentine energy moving through you, calling you to a deeper truth? The sacred feminine isn't waiting for permission to return. It's knocking at the door of your consciousness right now. Will you ignore it, or will you receive this power that has been yours from the beginning? I challenge you to do one thing. Today, listen to the wisdom of your body. Allow your intuition to guide an important decision. Reconnect with that part of you that already knows, that has always known. If this knowledge has awakened something in you, don't let the flame go out. Subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications to continue this journey of awakening. The next video will delve even deeper into these ancient mysteries and reveal practices that have been hidden for millennia. The path is open. Are you ready to walk it?